My sister had everything handed to her growing up, new cars, private school, the whole 9 yards. Then at Thanksgiving dinner, she learned I had $30 million and completely lost it in front of everyone. My aunt screamed and my dad just. They always told me I was nothing, overlooked, second best. But at Thanksgiving dinner, the family that had always given my sister everything found out I was secretly worth $30 million, and the explosion that followed, well, it was everything I never knew I needed. Growing up, I learned really fast that love in my family came with a whole lot of conditions. My older sister, Madison, she was the golden child. From the moment she entered the world, she was the sun and I was just the shadow she cast, born 3 years later, an accident my mom loved to remind me of during arguments. The way we were treated wasn't subtle. It was glaring in your face, and it shaped every single day of my childhood. Madison went to Westlake Academy, this super fancy private school where tuition cost more than most people made in a year. Me? I went to Roosevelt Public High, where the ceiling tiles had water stains and the textbooks were older than I was. When Madison turned 16, Dad bought her a brand new, pearl white BMW 3 Series. I got a bus pass and my mom's rusted 1998 Honda Civic that broke down, like clockwork, twice a month. Her college at Stanford was paid for completely. I worked 3 jobs to afford community college, then fought for scholarships to transfer to a state school. The excuses were always the same, rote and rehearsed. Madison needs to focus on her studies. Your sister has such potential. We're investing in Madison's future. What they really meant, what echoed in my bones, was that Madison was worth investing in, and I wasn't. My parents, Richard and Susan, their priorities couldn't have been clearer. Dad had a pretty successful accounting firm. Mom was a real estate agent. They had money. They just chose to spend it all on one daughter. By 12, I just stopped asking for things. Madison got a trip to Europe for high school graduation. I asked for help with college applications and was told to figure it out myself. She had a monthly allowance that dwarfed what I made working weekends at the grocery store. Her closet was bursting with designer clothes. I haunted thrift stores, learning to alter everything to fit. Christmas mornings were brutal. She'd open gift after gift, while I got maybe 1 or 2 practical items, socks, a discount store sweater. But the worst part wasn't the stuff. It was watching their faces light up, truly light up, when Madison walked into a room, then seeing that light dim, just a flicker, when they noticed me. It was Dad bragging about Madison's accomplishments to his colleagues, then introducing me with a vague, "This is my other daughter, Cynthia." It was Mom's social media, hundreds of photos of Madison, maybe a dozen of me, most of them years old. I developed this survival mechanism, I just became invisible. I'd stay in my room, study obsessively, and dream of escape. Madison thrived on attention, on praise. She constantly needed validation, needed to know she was special. She'd throw these epic tantrums if she didn't get exactly what she wanted, and Mom and Dad would just bend over backward. Meanwhile, I learned self-reliance. I learned that depending on anyone would only lead to crushing disappointment. The moment I could, after high school, I moved out. I worked full-time while going to college, lived in this tiny studio that barely had heating, and survived on ramen and whatever was on clearance at the supermarket. My parents didn't offer to help, and I sure as hell didn't ask. Madison, on the other hand, lived in a luxury apartment near Stanford, fully paid for by Dad, with a monthly stipend on top of it. She posted Instagram photos of wine country trips while I picked up extra shifts during holiday breaks, trying to scrape by. I graduated with a degree in computer science and a math minor. I found I actually had a real knack for programming and problem solving, something I genuinely loved, something that was entirely mine. I got a job at a tech startup in Austin, Texas, as far away from my family in suburban Connecticut as I could get. The salary wasn't amazing at first, but the company gave equity to early employees. I lived frugally, saved aggressively, and taught myself about investing. The startup was called VertX Solutions. We were building inventory management software using machine learning. There were only 12 of us when I joined as a junior developer, but I quickly proved myself. The founders, Chris and Jennifer, they were former Amazon engineers. They saw potential in me that my own parents never had. They promoted me twice in the first year. I ended up as the lead developer for our core product. Austin became my sanctuary. I made real friends, people who knew nothing about my past, nothing about my family. They just knew me as Cynthia, the programmer who was always down for tacos and terrible karaoke. I even started seeing a therapist, Dr. Reynolds, who helped me untangle all the baggage from years of conditional love. During those years, I'd call home maybe once every 2 months. The conversations were always the same. Mom would spend 5 minutes asking perfunctory questions about my life, then launch into 30 minutes of updates about Madison's latest endeavors. Dad would get on briefly, ask about my computer job in a tone that clearly said he didn't understand or care. Madison? She never asked to speak to me, and I never asked for her. I remember one particularly painful call, my second year in Austin. I'd just gotten promoted to lead developer, a huge accomplishment with a significant raise. I was so proud, and some naive part of me, some small, hopeful part, still wanted to share it with them. When I told my mother, she just said, "Oh, that's nice, honey." Then, immediately, she pivoted to telling me that Madison had been featured in a local newspaper article about young entrepreneurs. The article was about her failed jewelry business, mind you, framed as an inspiring story about taking risks. Mom read me the entire thing, her voice brimming with pride. I hung up and cried for the first time in years. Not because I was surprised, but because I'd let myself hope, just for a second, that things might be different. Dr. Reynolds helped me process it. She helped me see that I kept returning to this well, expecting water, when it had been dry my entire life. That call was a turning point. I stopped sharing my achievements. I stopped hoping for validation that would never come. The company grew steadily. From 12 employees to 50, then over 100. With each funding round, my equity stake became more valuable, theoretical money, of course. I still lived modestly, sharing an apartment with my roommate Jessica, who worked in nonprofit. We'd stay up late talking about our dreams, hers to reform criminal justice, mine to eventually start my own company focused on technology for social good. Meanwhile, Madison's life continued its chaotic trajectory. Through Aunt Patricia, who was my main source of family intel, I heard about her string of wealthy boyfriends, each relationship ending dramatically. There was the investment banker who dumped her after she maxed out a credit card he'd given her for emergencies. The real estate developer who caught her lying about having a job. The trust fund kid who finally saw through her manufactured persona. Each breakup meant moving back home, parental support, and then bouncing back with a new scheme. My parents funded it all. They paid for her life coaching certification she never used. Bankrolled her attempt to become a personal stylist for 3 months. Covered the costs when she enrolled in a master's degree in communications, only for her to drop out after 1 semester because the classes were too demanding. The money just flowed endlessly from their accounts to hers, subsidizing a lifestyle she couldn't afford, enabling a dependency that kept her trapped. The tech startup, my startup, it started gaining serious traction. Our software was revolutionizing inventory management for e-commerce. We landed major clients, Wayfair, Target, big fashion retailers. We were processing billions in inventory data, and our algorithms were saving clients millions. We went through several funding rounds, and my equity stake, which I'd stubbornly held onto despite opportunities to cash out small amounts, grew exponentially. During the Series B, some colleagues sold portions of their equity. I was tempted. Even then, it would have been life-changing money, maybe $200,000. But something told me to hold on. Chris and Jennifer believed we were building something special, and I trusted their vision. Series C brought in even more money. The valuation climbed into the hundreds of millions. Vertex Solutions was being talked about in tech publications as one of the most promising B2B software companies. Recruiters from major tech companies started reaching out to me, offering huge salaries. But I stayed, partly because I believed in what we were doing, and partly because I'd built something there that felt like family, the kind of supportive, appreciative family I'd never had growing up. Then, the acquisition talk started. A Fortune 500 corporation, a giant in enterprise software, had been watching us. They wanted our tech. They were willing to pay handsomely. The negotiations dragged on for months. I wasn't in those rooms, but the energy in the office shifted. Whispers, hints from the founders that something big was coming. The day it was announced, Chris and Jennifer called everyone to the main floor. They looked exhausted, but totally elated. The deal was done. The numbers they shared made people gasp. For the founders, it was a life-changing exit. For early employees like me, it was substantial enough that financial advisors would need to be involved. The actual closing took another 6 weeks. Legal reviews, regulatory approvals, all the corporate machinery grinding away. During that time, I couldn't quite wrap my head around what was coming. My financial advisor, who I'd hired specifically to help me make sense of it all, ran the numbers multiple times. With my equity stake, the vesting schedule, the acquisition price, I was looking at somewhere between $28 and $32 million after taxes. When the wire transfer finally hit my account, I sat in my living room at 2 a.m, logging into my bank app for the 15th time to confirm it was real. The number just sat there, undeniable: $30,247,812. I'd gone from worrying about grocery money just a few years earlier to someone who would never have to worry about money again. I called Jessica into the room. She knew what was happening, and we just stared at my phone screen together, speechless. I didn't tell anyone. For months, I just let the money sit there, trying to process it. I kept working. The acquiring company wanted to retain key personnel, and, honestly, I loved my job. I'd built a life in Austin that I adored. Good friends, a nice apartment downtown, hobbies. The money felt surreal, like something that might vanish if I acknowledged it too loudly. Eventually, I started making changes, but subtle ones. I bought a beautiful house in the hills with a view of the lake. Hired a team to manage everything. Set up trusts and charitable foundations. Invested. I made sure I was set for life and that I could genuinely make a difference. But I drove a normal car, dressed in regular clothes. The people I worked with knew I'd done well, but the full extent remained private. My relationship with my family had become minimal. I called my parents on holidays, visited once a year maybe, kept conversations surface level. Madison and I barely spoke. She'd occasionally text, asking for favors or money, which I'd politely decline. My parents seemed content with this arrangement, totally focused on Madison's endless crises. She'd gone through more failed relationships, blown through money faster than they could give it to her, and existed in this perpetual chaos that always required parental intervention. Then came the invitation to Thanksgiving dinner. My mother called, which was unusual. She insisted I come home, mentioning that Aunt Patricia and Uncle Jim would be there. A real family gathering for the first time in years. Something in her voice made me hesitate, but I eventually agreed. It had been almost 2 years since I'd seen everyone, and despite everything, some small, foolish part of me still craved connection. I flew into Hartford and rented a car. I booked a hotel, claiming I had work calls that might disturb everyone. The truth was, I couldn't stomach sleeping under their roof, in my old room that was probably now storage for Madison's excess belongings. When I pulled up to the house on Thanksgiving morning, the familiar colonial-style home stirred complicated emotions. Madison's new Audi sat in the driveway, a gift from Dad for her 28th birthday. She'd crashed the BMW 3 years ago, and naturally, it had been immediately replaced. Inside, the house smelled like roasting turkey and cinnamon. My mother greeted me with a stiff hug, immediately commenting that I looked tired and asking if I was eating enough. Madison appeared from the living room, her outfit clearly expensive, her hair professionally styled. She looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain, taking in my simple jeans and sweater. "Cynthia, wow, you actually came. Still living in Texas?" She said it like Texas was some backward wasteland. "Still there. I love Austin." I kept my voice neutral. "That's sweet. Some people are just built for simpler lives." She smiled, saccharine and condescending. "I'm actually about to close on a condo in Manhattan. Dad's helping with the down payment, but it's mostly my investment." I've been consulting for several major fashion brands, so the income is finally where it needs to be. I knew for a fact she wasn't consulting for anyone. Mom had mentioned during a brief call that Madison was, once again, unemployed. But I just nodded and moved past her into the kitchen where Mom was frantically preparing food. Aunt Patricia arrived with her family, followed by Uncle Jim and Aunt Sarah. The house filled with noise and activity. Patricia cornered me at one point, asking about my life with genuine interest. She'd always been kinder to me, though she never directly confronted my parents about their blatant favoritism. "You look good, Cynthia. Really good, actually. There's something different about you." She studied my face. "I'm happy. Life is good." It was the truest thing I'd said all day. Dinner was the usual elaborate affair. Mom had gone all out, multiple courses, expensive wine, a table decorated like a magazine spread. Dad sat at the head of the table, Madison to his right, in the place of honor. I ended up between Uncle Jim and one of Patricia's teenagers. The conversation flowed around me: jobs, politics, family gossip. Madison dominated, as always. She talked extensively about her Manhattan condo plans, describing the neighborhood, the amenities, her vision for decorating. She mentioned several expensive furniture pieces, throwing around designer names casually. My father beamed at her, adding comments about what a smart investment it was, how proud he was of her initiative. "Madison has always had such sophisticated taste," Mom said, refilling wine glasses. "She knows quality when she sees it. That's why we made sure she had the right education and opportunities. It's paying off now." The implied comparison hung heavy in the air. Madison caught my eye and smirked slightly, reveling in her moment. I focused on my food, counting down the hours until I could leave. Then, Patricia asked the question that changed everything. "So, Cynthia, how's your career going? Still with that tech company?" "Actually, we were acquired earlier this year. It's been a transition, but positive overall." I kept it vague, hoping the conversation would just move on. "Acquired? What does that mean?" Patricia leaned forward, genuinely interested. "A larger company bought us out. It's common in the tech industry." I took a sip of water, trying to signal this wasn't a big topic, but Uncle Jim picked up the thread. "Wait, you were with a startup, right? Did you have equity?" There was no good way to deflect. Jim was a financial consultant. He understood the implications immediately. "Yes, early employees. Received stock options and the acquisition." "That must have been a significant windfall," he interrupted, pieces clicking into place. "Those early startup stakes can be worth serious money." The table had gone quiet. Everyone had suddenly tuned in. Madison's smile had frozen on her face. My father was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "It worked out well," I tried to downplay it. "But the damage was done." "How well?" Madison's voice had an edge to it. "Like, what are we talking, 100,000? I could have lied. I could have minimized it. But something in her tone, that automatic assumption that whatever I'd accomplished would be inferior to anything she could achieve, made me pause. I was tired of being invisible. Tired of being treated like I was worth less. Tired of pretending that my success didn't matter because acknowledging it might upset their fragile family dynamic. More than that, I met her eyes directly. "Like 500,000, she laughed, clearly thinking that was an absurd ceiling. "More? 1,000,000. My father spoke now, his voice sharp. "You made $1,000,000? "More than that, Dad." The room felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out. Patricia's eyes were wide. Uncle Jim was nodding slowly, like he finally understood. My mother had stopped moving entirely, frozen with a serving spoon in midair. Madison's face had gone pale. "How much more?" I could feel the weight of the moment. All those years of being overlooked, dismissed, an afterthought. All the times Madison had been celebrated for the bare minimum, while my actual accomplishments went unnoticed. Something inside me, some final restraint, simply snapped. The acquisition was for a substantial amount, and early employee equity stakes translated to significant payouts. After taxes and everything else, I cleared just over $30 million. The silence was deafening. Then, everything exploded at once. Madison stood up so fast her chair fell backward with a crash. Her face went from pale to bright red, her hands shaking. You're lying. You're lying. There's no way you did. That's impossible. Madison, language. My mother's automatic response, even in her shock. Language? Language. Madison was shrieking. She's sitting there claiming she has $30 million. $30 million. And you're worried about my language. My father had stood up too, his face ashen. Cynthia, is this true? You have $30 million. Yes, Dad. Give or take a few million, depending on current market valuations of my remaining investments. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Madison was pacing now, hands in her hair. This can't be happening. This isn't real. She's making it up for attention. I'm not making anything up. I have documentation if you need proof, but I don't particularly care if you believe me or not. My voice stayed calm, which seemed to infuriate Madison further. Documentation. Documentation. She grabbed her wine glass, and for a moment I thought she might throw it. Do you know what I could do with that kind of money? Do you have any idea? And it went to you. To humdrum Cynthia, who wore thrift store clothes and drove a piece of junk car. Madison, stop it right now. Patricia stood up, her voice commanding. You're having a meltdown over someone else's success. Do you hear yourself? But Madison was beyond reason. Years of entitlement and jealousy poured out in a toxic flood. She doesn't deserve it. She never deserved anything. I'm the one who went to Stanford. I'm the one who had potential. She went to some nothing state school and worked at some random startup. This isn't fair. Fair. The word came out of me harder than I intended. You want to talk about fair, Madison? You got a BMW at 16. I got a bus pass. You got Stanford fully paid. I worked 3 jobs and took out loans. You got a luxury apartment and a monthly allowance. I ate ramen in a studio with broken heating. Everything was handed to you on a silver platter your entire life. And you're standing there screaming about fairness because I actually worked for something and succeeded. My mother had started crying. Cynthia, honey, we didn't know. We never thought. You never thought I'd amount to anything. Yes, Mom. I'm aware. You made that crystal clear my entire childhood. The words came faster now, years of suppressed hurt breaking through. Every choice you made told me I wasn't worth investing in. Every time you praised Madison and ignored me. Every time you bought her something expensive and gave me nothing. Every time you forgot my birthday but threw Madison a party. All of it told me exactly what you thought of me. We were just trying to help Madison reach her potential. Dad's voice was desperate. She needed more support. Or, I laughed, sharp and bitter, she was easier to love. Let's be honest about what actually happened. You favored one daughter over the other. You poured everything into Madison and left me to fend for myself. And you know what? Fine. I'm grateful for it now because it taught me self-reliance. It taught me that I couldn't depend on anyone but myself. And that lesson, as painful as it was, helped me build something real. Madison had collapsed into her chair, sobbing dramatically. This is a nightmare. An actual nightmare. She can't have that much money. It's not possible. Tell me it's not possible. Aunt Sarah had moved to comfort my mother while Uncle Jim watched wide-eyed. Patricia's teenage daughter was recording on her phone until Patricia quietly told her to put it away. The whole thing was a disaster, but I felt strangely liberated. The truth was finally out. How long have you had this money? Dad asked, his voice hollow. 9 months, give or take. He sat down heavily. You've had $30 million for 9 months and didn't tell us? Why would I? I asked flatly. So Madison could ask me to fund her lifestyle? So you could finally decide I was worth your attention now that I have money? I didn't tell you because my relationship with this family has been essentially non-existent, by your design. You made it clear what I was worth to you. That didn't change just because my bank account did. That's not fair. Mom was openly crying now. We love you, Cynthia. We've always loved you. You love me. The question came out softer than I intended. When? When did you love me, Mom? When you forgot to come to my high school graduation because Madison had a dental appointment. When you told Aunt Patricia I was going through a phase when I made the dean's list. When you sent Madison to Europe and told me I should be grateful for what I had. When did that love show up exactly? Silence. She couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. Madison suddenly lunged at me across the table. Patricia and Tom caught her before she could reach me, but she was screaming, completely unhinged. I hate you. I've always hated you. You were supposed to be nothing. You were supposed to stay nothing. This was supposed to be my life, mine. Madison. Jesus Christ, get control of yourself. Patricia was struggling to hold her back. Let her go, I said quietly. She's not going to hurt me. She's just realizing that being handed everything her whole life didn't actually prepare her for the real world. That's not my fault. That's yours, Mom and Dad. You did this to her. You created someone so entitled and so fragile that someone else's success feels like a personal attack. My father's face had crumbled. He suddenly looked much older than his 62 years. We made mistakes. We can see that now. But Cynthia, you have to understand, I don't have to understand anything. I interrupted. I spent my entire childhood trying to understand why I wasn't enough. Why I wasn't worth the same love and investment as Madison. I'm done trying to understand. I'm done hoping things will change. This dinner just confirmed what I already knew. This family is toxic, and I'm better off without it. I stood up, folding my napkin and placing it beside my plate. Madison had stopped struggling and was just crying, mascara running down her face. Mom was shaking her head repeatedly, like she could deny what was happening. Dad stared at the table, unable to meet my eyes. Cynthia, please don't go. Aunt Patricia's voice was gentle. I know this is awful, but I'm not angry at you, Patricia. You've always been kind to me. But I can't stay here. This was a mistake from the start. I grabbed my purse. For what it's worth, I'm doing well. I'm happy. I have good friends, a career I love, and yes, financial security. I built a life that works for me, without any help from the people who were supposed to support me. I don't need your approval or your love anymore. I stopped needing that a long time ago. I walked toward the door, and my mother's voice stopped me. What do we do now? How do we fix this? I turned back. She looked broken, desperate, like she was finally seeing the consequences of decades of choices. You can't fix this, Mom. This isn't something you can solve with a conversation or an apology. You built this family dynamic brick by brick, choice by choice, year by year. Madison's meltdown isn't the problem. It's a symptom of the problem. The problem is that you raised her to believe she was inherently more valuable than me. And now she can't cope with reality. The problem is that you spent my entire childhood showing me I didn't matter. And now you're surprised I built a life that doesn't include you. We can change, Dad's voice cracked. We can do better. Maybe you can, but I'm not interested in finding out. I needed parents who believed in me when I was 12, 15, 18. I needed support when I was struggling to afford textbooks and working multiple jobs. I needed you to show up for me even once with the same energy you showed up for Madison constantly. That time has passed. I became who I am despite you, not because of you, and I'm proud of that. But it means we don't have a relationship worth salvaging. Madison had gone quiet, staring at me with red-rimmed eyes. For just a moment, I saw something that might have been understanding flicker across her face, but then it was gone, replaced by resentment and bitterness. I walked out the door into the cold November evening. Behind me, I could hear renewed sobbing and raised voices, but I didn't look back. I got in my rental car and drove away from that house, that family, that entire chapter of my life. The hotel room was quiet when I returned. I ordered room service, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat by the window looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed constantly. Texts from my mother, calls from my father, a series of increasingly unhinged messages from Madison that ranged from apologetic to threatening to begging. I turned it on silent and ignored them all. Aunt Patricia texted once, "I'm so sorry you had to grow up that way. I should have said something years ago. You deserve better. I'm proud of who you've become." I responded with a simple thank you and told her I wasn't cutting her off, just my immediate family. She deserved that clarification at least. The next morning, I changed my flight and headed back to Austin early. As the plane took off, I felt lighter than I had in years. The secret was out. The confrontation was over. And I was free. Free from the weight of trying to earn love from people who didn't know how to give it. Free from the silent comparisons and the constant feeling of being less than. Free from the hope that someday things might be different. 3 weeks later, I received a certified letter from my parents. It was a long, rambling apology that tried to explain their choices and express their regrets. They wanted to make amends, to be part of my life, to start over. Madison had apparently had a complete breakdown after Thanksgiving and was in therapy. They were in therapy, too, trying to understand where they'd gone wrong. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. Maybe someday I'd respond. Maybe someday I'd be open to rebuilding something with them. But not today. Not this year. Possibly not ever. The money had changed things, but not in the way they might have thought. It hadn't made me happier. I'd already built a happy life before the windfall. What it had done was give me the freedom to completely walk away without guilt or fear. I didn't need anything from them. I didn't need their approval, their support, or their presence in my life. The financial security meant I could close that door permanently without wondering if I'd regret it later. I donated money to scholarships for first-generation college students. I funded programs for kids from families where one child was clearly favored over another. Yes, that's a real thing, and there are support groups for it. I invested in women's business ventures and tech startups run by people who'd been overlooked by traditional funding sources. My money went to places where it could make a real difference to people who reminded me of my younger self, struggling and underestimated. Madison sent me an email 6 months later. It was surprisingly self-aware, written from rehab where she was dealing with substance abuse issues and what her therapist called golden child syndrome. She apologized for her behavior, acknowledged how she'd been raised to see me as less than, and said she was working on becoming a better person. She didn't ask for money or help, which, honestly, was progress. She just wanted me to know she was sorry. I wrote back briefly, wishing her well in her recovery, but making it clear I wasn't interested in rebuilding a sisterly relationship. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. The foundation was too damaged. My parents kept trying for a while. Birthday cards with checks I returned. Christmas presents I donated. Invitations to holidays I declined. Eventually, the attempts became less frequent. We settled into a distant, cordial arrangement. They were essentially strangers who happened to be related to me by blood. A year and a half after that Thanksgiving disaster, I was sitting in my home office when Aunt Patricia called. Dad had suffered a heart attack. He was stable but had requested to see me. She wasn't pressuring me, just passing along the information. I told her I'd think about it. I did visit him in the hospital briefly. He looked frail and scared, nothing like the confident man who had once held me at arm's length while showering Madison with affection. He apologized again, tears streaming down his face. He said he'd spent the past year and a half thinking about all his regrets, and I was at the top of the list. He wanted another chance. I told him I forgave him, and I meant it, not for his sake, but for mine. I didn't want to carry that anger anymore. But forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. I wished him a full recovery, said I was glad he was getting perspective on his life, and left. I didn't come back after he was discharged, and he didn't ask me to. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how things turned out with my family. The answer is complicated. I regret that my parents couldn't love both their daughters equally. I regret that Madison was raised in a way that damaged her ability to function as an independent adult. I regret all those years feeling like I wasn't enough. But I don't regret walking away. I don't regret building my own life, my own success, my own definition of family. That includes friends who show up for me and care about me regardless of my bank account. I don't regret that Thanksgiving dinner showdown because it brought everything into the open and gave me permission to stop trying. The $30 million didn't solve my problems or heal my childhood wounds. But it did give me the ultimate freedom. The freedom to choose who gets to be in my life based on how they treat me, not on what I might need from them. And that freedom, more than any amount of money, was worth everything. Madison eventually got sober, finished her therapy, and started working a real job in marketing. She's apparently doing better, according to Patricia, who still keeps me updated on family news. My parents are older now, facing their mortality and grappling with the consequences of their choices. Mom volunteers at a family counseling center, which Patricia says is her way of trying to make amends for her failures as a mother. As for me, I'm still in Austin. I started my own company focused on developing software for nonprofits and social services. I travel when I want, donate generously to causes that matter, and surround myself with people who value me for who I am. I have a partner now, someone who knew me before they knew about the money, and who loves me for the person I became through all those struggles. The story of that Thanksgiving dinner has become almost legendary in my friend group, the time my sister had a complete meltdown because I turned out successful despite being the other daughter. But to me, it's less about the drama and more about the moment I finally stopped waiting for my family to see my worth. I'd already known it all along. I just needed to stop caring whether they ever figured it out. Sometimes the best revenge isn't carefully planned. Sometimes it's just living well, succeeding on your own terms, and refusing to let the people who underestimated you have any power over your happiness. The look on Madison's face when she realized I had everything she thought she deserved, that wasn't why I succeeded. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't satisfying to watch her understand that the world doesn't owe you anything just because you were told you were special. I built my empire from nothing while she waited for hers to be handed to her. And when the truth came out over turkey and stuffing, surrounded by family who'd enabled it all, I finally got to stand up and walk away, knowing I'd done it entirely on my own. No inheritance, no family money, no connections, just hard work, smart choices, and the resilience you develop when you learn early that you're the only person you can truly count on. That's the real story. Not the money, not the meltdown, not the dramatic confrontation. The real story is about a girl who was told she didn't matter and decided to prove that the only opinion that mattered was her own. And in the end, that made all the difference. Walking out that door on Thanksgiving night, away from the shattered remnants of what my family pretended to be, felt like shedding a lead cloak. The drive back to the hotel was a blur. My phone, as I said, vibrated with their frantic calls and texts, each notification a ghostly whisper of the past trying to pull me back. But the decision was made. I turned it to silent, placed it face down on the bedside table, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly, unapologetically free. Back in Austin, the quiet of my apartment felt like a balm. Jessica was still asleep when I got in, but she found me later that morning, nursing a cup of coffee and staring out at the city. She didn't say much at first, just sat next to me, offering a comforting presence. When I finally told her everything, the whole dramatic, tear-soaked, scream-filled saga, she just listened. No judgment, no "I told you so," just a quiet, "Wow, Siwan. I'm proud of you." That was it. No grand pronouncements, no shock about the money. Jessica knew my story, she knew the struggle, and her affirmation meant the world. That's the difference between chosen family and blood. One sees you, truly sees you, for who you are. The other, well, they were still trying to figure out what to do with a daughter who was no longer just a footnote to Madison's story. Dr. Reynolds, my therapist, was the next person I shared the full account with. Her office was my sanctuary, a place where I could unravel the knots of my past without fear. She didn't look surprised when I recounted the Thanksgiving dinner. Instead, she offered a knowing smile. "It sounds like you finally set fire to the bridge, Cynthia. And sometimes, that's the only way to build a new, stronger one." We talked for hours about the anger, the liberation, the profound sadness that still lingered for the family I wished I'd had. We unpacked the sense of guilt that gnawed at me, guilt for having so much, guilt for hurting them, guilt for walking away. She helped me understand that guilt was a natural byproduct of breaking unhealthy patterns, a sign that I was fundamentally a good person, even if my family's choices had forced me into a position where I had to prioritize my own well-being. The money, that colossal sum, was still mostly theoretical. It sat in my bank account, a monumental digit that hadn't quite integrated into the reality of my daily life. I continued to drive my modest car, wore my comfortable clothes, and went to work at the acquired company. Life, on the surface, hadn't changed drastically. But inwardly, everything was different. The pressure was gone. The constant, gnawing need to prove myself, to them, to the world, had vanished. I worked because I loved it, because I was good at it, and because the challenges excited me. Not because I was trying to fill a void or earn validation. My colleagues, those who had been with Vertex Solutions from the early days, knew I'd done well. We'd all done well. There was a sense of camaraderie, a shared triumph. But the exact figures, the sheer scale of my personal payout, remained my secret. It was a shield, a quiet power that protected my newfound peace. I learned to deflect casual inquiries, to downplay my success just enough to not invite jealousy or uncomfortable expectations, but firmly enough to command respect. Over the next few months, with Dr. Reynolds' guidance, I began to truly map out the next phase of my life. My new company, the one focused on software for nonprofits and social services, started to take shape in earnest. I poured my passion into it, drawing on all those years of feeling dismissed and unseen. I knew what it was like to be underestimated, to struggle against systemic disadvantages. I wanted to build tools that empowered those on the front lines, helping them maximize their impact, streamline their operations, and reach more people who needed help. My first project was an inventory management system specifically designed for small food banks and shelters, something that mirrored Vertex Solutions, but with a heart-driven mission. It wasn't easy. Starting a company, even with capital, demands relentless effort. There were long nights, frustrating roadblocks, and moments of self-doubt. But this time, it felt different. Every success was mine, truly mine, fueled by an intrinsic desire to contribute, not by a need for external approval. Jessica, seeing my dedication, eventually left her nonprofit job to join my new venture as Chief Operating Officer. Her passion for social justice combined with my tech acumen was a powerful force. We called the company Embolden Tech. The name was deliberate. We wanted to embolden good. My philanthropic efforts also intensified. The scholarships for first-generation college students became a personal mission. I remembered the burning ambition, the terror of not being able to afford textbooks, the exhaustion of juggling multiple jobs. I set up a foundation, quietly, anonymously at first, to fund these dreams. It wasn't just about tuition. It was about providing stipends for living expenses, mentorship programs, and a support network so these students could focus on their studies, not just survival. And the programs for kids from favored/unfavored families? That was a harder one to articulate, but profoundly personal. It wasn't about financially supporting them, but about creating spaces for emotional healing and self-discovery. I funded camps and workshops focused on building self-esteem, teaching emotional intelligence, and fostering healthy coping mechanisms. I wanted these children to understand, earlier than I did, that their worth wasn't tied to their parents' attention or someone else's perceived potential. That they were enough, just as they were. Seeing the light in those kids' eyes, witnessing their small victories, brought me a profound sense of purpose that no amount of money or professional success alone ever could. Aunt Patricia remained my touchstone to the past. Our conversations became more frequent, more intimate. She was devastated by the Thanksgiving debacle, but also, in a way, relieved that the truth was finally out. She shared updates about my parents and Madison in hushed tones, almost like she was apologizing for them. My parents were, indeed, in therapy, grappling with the wreckage of their choices. Patricia said Mom was a ghost of her former self, and Dad was consumed by a quiet, heavy regret. They'd tried to apologize to Patricia, to explain themselves, but she held firm. "You let it happen for too long," she told them. Cynthia deserved better. It wasn't a rebuke, it was a statement. A fact, delivered with the same quiet strength she'd always possessed. Madison's journey was more tumultuous. Patricia described her initial breakdown as catastrophic. Rehab was a long, painful road. The golden child syndrome her therapist diagnosed was, as I understood it, the core of her entire identity unraveling. She had never been forced to confront reality, to develop internal coping mechanisms, to forge her own path. Everything had been buffered, excused, or simply handed to her. Now, without that buffer, she was raw and exposed. My brief email response, Wishing her well but maintaining distance was met with more desperate pleas at first than a quiet acceptance. Patricia reported that Madison's therapist had told her that the wake-up call of my success, coupled with the loss of parental enabling, was, ironically, the best thing that could have happened to her. It forced her to finally look inward. Around this time, I met David. He wasn't involved in tech, which was a refreshing change. He was an architect, grounded, thoughtful, and incredibly kind. We met at a local dog park. I'd finally adopted a rescue dog, a goofy terrier mix named Pixel, who immediately took a liking to David. Our early dates were simple: coffee, walks with Pixel, talking for hours. I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't dared with anyone else since Jessica. He knew about my past, about the conditional love, the feeling of being an afterthought. But I kept the extent of my wealth private, at least initially. I needed to know he loved me, Cynthia, the woman who loved tacos and terrible karaoke, the woman who was building a company with her best friend, the woman who had fought for everything she had. When I finally told him about the $30 million, a few months into our relationship, it was over a quiet dinner at home. I was terrified. Would he change? Would he see dollar signs instead of me? He listened patiently, then looked at me, his eyes full of warmth. "CYN," he said, gently taking my hand. "That's incredible. And it explains a lot. But it doesn't change who you are. It just means you have more resources to be the amazing person I already know." He meant it. I could see it in his eyes, feel it in his steady grip. David saw the struggle, the resilience, the heart behind the money, not the money itself. That was a truly profound moment for me, realizing that genuine, unconditional love was possible, not just a theoretical concept. Life with $30 million, I quickly learned, wasn't a fairy tale devoid of challenges. New forms of pressure emerged. Suddenly, distant relatives I barely knew started popping up, with investment opportunities or urgent family needs. My financial team, thankfully, handled most of it, but it still required emotional energy to draw firm boundaries. There was the constant temptation to buy every luxury, to indulge every whim. But my early experiences had instilled a deep frugality, a respect for every dollar. I enjoyed comfort and beauty, yes, but excess felt hollow. My true joy came from using the money to create, to help, to invest in things that truly mattered. One day, an article came out about Embolden Tech, highlighting our work with underserved communities and our innovative approach to social good. It caught a lot of attention. The article mentioned my background, my journey from humble beginnings, and praised my dedication to leveraging technology for positive change. It was a moment of public recognition, but one that felt earned, authentic. It was a stark contrast to Madison's past attempts at influencer status or entrepreneurship based on parental funding. I even heard, through Patricia, that my mother had cut out the article and kept it, though she never mentioned it to me directly. Small victories. My own trauma, though largely processed, still surfaced occasionally. A critical comment from a new employee might trigger that old feeling of not being enough. A moment of quiet self-reflection might bring back the sting of forgotten birthdays. But now I had tools. I had Dr. Reynolds, who helped me reframe these feelings, acknowledge them without letting them consume me. I had Jessica, who knew when to offer a grounding perspective or a much-needed laugh. And I had David, whose unwavering love and belief in me became a constant source of strength. He taught me how to lean on someone, how to trust that support, not just provide it. Our wedding, a year after that fateful Thanksgiving, was a small, intimate affair in our Austin backyard. It was filled with laughter, good food, and the people who truly mattered: Jessica, Aunt Patricia, Chris, and Jennifer from Bert X, a handful of close friends. My parents and Madison were not invited. There was no bitterness in that decision, just a quiet understanding that this new family, this chosen family, was complete without them. Patricia brought a framed photo from her own family album, a rare picture of me as a little girl, laughing freely, unburdened. It was a simple, thoughtful gift that spoke volumes. My father's heart attack, as Patricia relayed, came another year after the wedding. I visited him in the hospital, as I recounted. Seeing him so frail, so genuinely scared, was disorienting. He was a shadow of the man I'd feared, resented, and, for so long, desperately sought approval from. His apologies were raw, unvarnished. He talked about his regrets, his blindness, his misplaced priorities. "You were right, Cynthia," he rasped, tears in his eyes. "We messed up. So badly." When I told him I forgave him, it wasn't easy. The words felt heavy, thick with years of unspoken pain. But they were true. I forgave him, not for him, but for me. Forgiveness, Dr. Reynolds had taught me, wasn't about condoning the past or opening the door for reconciliation. It was about releasing the burden of anger, letting go of the venom that kept me trapped. I wished him a full recovery, genuinely, and left. There was no grand reunion, no tearful embrace. Just a quiet moment of acknowledged truth, a closing of a very old wound. He understood. He didn't ask me to come back, and I didn't. Madison's recovery, Patricia updated me, continued its slow, steady pace. She found a job in marketing, something practical, something she had to work for. Her email, surprisingly self-aware, had been a turning point for her, a step towards owning her past. I never sought to rekindle our sisterly bond. The foundation was too damaged, too deeply cracked. Some relationships, even familial ones, are best left as lessons learned. My parents, though still in therapy, still processing, slowly began to find their own paths. My mother's volunteering at a family counseling center became her quiet penance, a way to channel her guilt into something productive, to perhaps prevent other parents from making the same mistakes she had. Dad, after his recovery, poured himself into community service, quietly working to make amends in his own way. They were finding their own definitions of purpose, divorced from the need to manage Madison's life or project an image of perfection. Years passed. Emboldened Tech thrived, expanding its reach, touching countless lives. My foundations grew, providing opportunities and healing to those who reminded me of my younger self. David and I built a beautiful life together, full of adventure, quiet moments, and unwavering support. We eventually had children, two amazing kids who grew up in a home filled with unconditional love, where their worth was never questioned, and their dreams were always nurtured. My story, the one about the Thanksgiving dinner, has indeed become legendary among my friends. They jokingly call it the $30 million turkey. But for me, it was never really about the money or the drama. It was about that moment of choice. The choice to stop trying to earn love from people who couldn't give it, and to start living a life that truly reflected my own worth. It was about realizing that the girl who was told she didn't matter had built an empire not of material possessions, but of resilience, purpose, and genuine connection. The greatest treasure wasn't the millions in my bank account, but the hard-won freedom to define my own happiness, to choose my own family, and to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was and always had been enough. The world doesn't owe you anything just because you were told you were special. But you owe it to yourself to build a life that is, in every meaningful way, truly special. And that, in the end, is the real story of Cynthia.